Thank you in particular for the opportunity for UNHCR to be able to speak today. It's been quite encouraging for the last day and a half now to be part of a human rights conference in Pakistan that has also included the right to seek asylum and the Afghan situation. In taking into account the character of this conference, the fact that this is predominantly a civil society event, I would like to hone in on a critical aspect to realizing human rights, in particular, realizing the right to seek asylum and its legitimacy. There's many dimensions to how to promote refugee rights and also how to promote the right to seek asylum. But this one on legitimacy, I think, is of vital importance and very well fits for this type of conference. Suleyman Jahangir aptly stated at the opening yesterday that states can close borders, but states cannot close minds and hearts. I'd like to kind of turn that one around a little bit and say that open hearts and minds can create incentives and space for a government to open their borders. Pakistan, as the EU ambassador has noted, has been hosting refugees. It's for 40 years. The Afghan situation is a protracted refugee situation. And when we speak about the current situation and the current dimensions of the crisis right now, we cannot forget this past. They are kind of twined up together. There's been millions of Afghans here in Pakistan for decades. Pakistan has been one of the largest hosting refugee countries over those 40 decades. Right now, it's currently the third largest in view of the situation in Syria and also in Venezuela. And this past is influencing the current approach the government is taking towards the Afghan situation. And here, I'd like to point out that we are observing a lot of growing anti-refugee rhetoric. We see this in social media. We see it in the printed press, particularly in terms of op-ed pieces. It's rare to see a pro-refugee tweet op-ed piece. I also heard it when I spoke on another panel. And on that panel was a range of different actors. We had a member of parliament, we had a retired general, we had an academic, we had a journalist, and it was hosted by a think tank. And the panel was discussing the situation in Afghanistan, but it was not very pro-refugee. In fact, the main expression across all these individuals was fatigue for hosting refugees and the economic and the security cost that this has placed on Pakistan. UNHCR were present at the two main border crossings, Chadman and Torkham. I've visited both of those border crossings. And the image that I have taken away from there and that sticks with me the strongest is the fence. There are incredible security mechanisms that have been put in place at the borders. You've got a fence, you've got security mechanisms, you have the military front and center on there. And I think this also speaks volumes that we need to take into account as we look at how we move forward. Further compounding this current situation and the challenges that we're facing is a lack of a legal framework on refugee matters. Despite having hosted refugees for 40 years, Pakistan has never ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention. It has not ratified the 1967 Protocol. The country also does not have any refugee legislation in place. They've been managing this situation through administrative procedures. Through these kind of mechanisms, it places refugees in a very precarious state because we just recently advocated for the documentation that the Afghan refugees have to be extended. It's extended until June 2023. We will soon have to go into another negotiation for that to be extended beyond June 2023 to make sure that people can move around the country. They can continue to have access to public schools. Pakistan, despite not having these measures in place, has been quite progressive. And I think when we look at the situation, we need to acknowledge how progressive they have been. And I say that as somebody who's worked in a number of different contexts with UNHCR. They allow the freedom of movement. They allow people to have access to their public schools. However, we need legislation in place. We need to be able to not constantly be negotiating refugee rights. Currently, UNHCR has three main preoccupations concerning this current situation. We're worried about safeguarding the protection space that has existed for these refugees for the last 40 years. And it has been a very peaceful coexistence in large part. We are also very worried about ensuring that people, Afghans who need to seek asylum, are able to seek asylum, because the right to seek asylum, it's not to come here for a job. It can be a life-saving right. We also are very concerned about forced returns to Afghanistan. We issued an advisory on a global level in mid-August in saying that no Afghans should be forcibly returned back to their country. We are in a constant dialogue with the government on these matters. This dialogue is largely out of the press. I think you probably heard it most when our High Commissioner was here in September, most recently. We're under very serious pressures. As I tried to underscore above, we are talking about lives. The right to seek asylum is about lives. And we're also talking about the 1.4 million Afghans that are here right now in this country and that have refugee status. As has been very well outlined, there is a dire humanitarian crisis taking place in Afghanistan. UNHCR is doing its best to scale up alongside other humanitarian actors to be able to respond. But I think it also came out quite clearly yesterday in listening to some of the discussions that there is also a range of ongoing human rights violations in the country. You also have a government that is not inclusive. And I think one speaker very well honed in and illustrated how deep of a challenge the country is facing when he flagged that there is a need for a social contract between the Taliban government and its people, and that at this point in time, there's not even a discussion about such a social contract. There is also still many people, many Afghans who are still in Afghanistan fighting for the future of their country, human rights activists, female activists, and journalists were some of the people that were flagged. And depending on how that situation progresses, these are the types of people who may still need to be seeking asylum. And so to return back to this question of legitimacy, and in particular here, it's the perceived legitimacy by the Pakistani people. We can say as the UN, what is the legitimacy inside international law? But it's that legitimacy that the people feel that is absolutely a core component to protecting Afghan refugees who are here and protecting the right to seek asylum of those who may need it. Many of you in this audience are key partners in helping us to create an environment that is conducive to upholding refugees and asylum seekers' rights. You're having a rights-based discussion here. This is vital. The last panel I was on was not a rights-based discussion. It was a discussion about fears and fatigue. So we need more discussions such as this. This public dialogue needs to continue here with Impact. This is going to be central to upholding these rights. So thank you again for inviting UNHCR and for caring enough to include refugees and asylum seekers on your agenda. Thank you. Because we've spoken a bit about the situation globally, and sadly the situation here in Pakistan and the situation throughout this region in response to the Afghan refugee situation and the potential for new influxes is not unique. We are facing globally decreasing support for refugees, decreasing support for asylum seekers. And here I'm using some terms, and maybe I'm using them a little bit without making sure that everybody's understanding. A refugee is somebody who has been recognized with a legal status according to the criteria outlined in the 1951. An asylum seeker is somebody who is applying for refugee status but has not yet been granted. And where there has been, and one of the speakers referenced, there's also been a bit of confusion with the evacuations that took place outside of Afghanistan. One of the core elements to being a refugee means you've crossed an international border. That's a major distinction between being internally displaced inside your country and crossing a border where you are in need of refugee protection to be able to remain in safety in that neighboring country or in another country. There's also been some confusion that's taken place with resettlement and the evacuations, and this has definitely created a lot of confusion within the Afghan community, and we have been receiving a lot of people approaching us thinking we are assisting the governments with the evacuations, which we are not. We do have a third country resettlement program. This, sadly, though, is a very small program because we're dependent upon states to offer us quotas to be able to take individuals from the country where they first sought asylum and be resettled into a third country. That's essentially 1% of the global refugee population. So there are many people approaching us, some for the purposes of asylum, some for aspirations to be resettled, and almost seeing us as we're sort of a travel agency, as was implied. We have been here in Pakistan since the Afghan refugees came in. And our office, we have an agreement with the government of Pakistan that's dating back to 1983. And that agreement recognizes our mandate. Our mandate is inside the 1951 convention, and our role is to protect refugees in line with the 1951 convention and the 67 protocol, and to seek solutions to the refugee plight. So there are people who are approaching us now. We do a registration of those who approach us, and that is in line with our mandate. We are not granting a refugee status. What we are doing is recognizing people as approaching us seeking asylum at this point in time, and we remain in a very regular dialogue. Sometimes that is almost every day of a working week. Sometimes that's a few times during the working week, and it's with many parts of the Pakistan government in trying to put in place measures for us to be able to respond to those who are coming across, and for us to make sure that those borders stay open so that if people are in need of asylum, they can seek it. Because as I said before, and I'll state it again, this can save lives on that point. We also are very alarmed, and when I spoke of our concern for safeguarding the protection space here in the country, that was indirectly a reference to deportations. And we have seen deportations that have been taking place, and this is out of character in Pakistan, and it is one that has put us very much on alarm. For individuals who want to take up advocacy, I would strongly encourage you to refer to the advisory that we issued in mid-August. This will outline, and it states that this is for Afghans regardless of their status. These can be Afghans refugees who have been recognized. This could be the asylum seekers. This could be people who are not even seeking asylum, but because of the precarious situation inside Afghanistan, we are saying no one should be forced back, and that is respecting the principle of refoulement, which correctly as highlighted is customary law, and you do not need a state to have ratified any body related, any instrument, international instrument related to that point. Kindly allow me also to kind of flag something, because a point came up, and I think it's a very valid point that I'd like to underscore. The refugee situation, this is not solely the responsibility of Pakistan. They have a special responsibility as a neighboring country, but as a few years ago, we passed, the General Assembly adopted the Global Compact on Refugees, and this very clearly underscored the fact that a refugee situation is a global situation, and it requires global solidarity. And here for the Afghan situation, we have also aligned with this Global Compact and building on an attempt by the governments of Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan dating back to 2012 to create a solution strategy for refugees. We've started a support platform here, and here, let me please play also quite a bit of a tribute to our EU ambassador, who is the chair of the core group that we have created here in country, and that brings together 13, or I should say 15 different actors, primarily member states, that are here to work in solidarity with the government of Pakistan and to provide some of the support. And this has also been quite a source of support for UNHCR, and that they have helped us with the advocacy and helped us to continue the discussions with the government to find a way to respond to the situation that's already here, to also be able to jointly plan together for the possibility of going forward. And it was also mentioned, sorry, I know I'm going on, but there was an important point made when there was, in 2017, the Prime Minister had put out an offer of citizenship for the refugees who had been born here, and he's retreated. There's been no action on that. That, to me, is a very clear reflection of the need for political support. He received a lot of backlash on the political process, and this is where civil society, I think, is invaluable in helping us to create a more positive reflection of the Afghan refugees and the contributions that they've had and the host communities that they have been living with and have generously lived with them for 40 years. And as our colleague in Afghanistan, a former refugee herself even stated, have many a times opened up their doors and their homes to these people on that front. So if we can take that hospitality that has been the norm for so many decades and put that forward again, I think this will help us to safeguard the protection space here and asylum rights. Thank you.